Okay, it is officially 9:30. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Before we officially start, I'd like to introduce my new co-chair. Most of you will probably recognize him as our former AD. Also, to welcome our new AD, incoming AD, Andy Newton. Hopefully, will not cause you too much heartburn. Welcome. Okay, here we go. Note well. By now, most of you should all have seen this. This covers our IPR, privacy, code of conduct. Please be civil, be respectful, and please read through all the linked policies. Note really well, this covers our anti-harassment policies. Again, please do not try to be hostile in your comments. Be nice. If anybody does feel like they're being harassed, please go talk to someone from our ombuds team. Meeting tips. Again, you've probably all seen this before. Please use the on-site tool to check in with Meet Echo. We use that now in lieu of the blue sheets. Please put your hand up if you want to join the queue. Also, if you're remote, please stay muted until it's your turn to speak, and please use a headset if possible. Here's the links to the agenda, Meet Echo, and everything else you should need. Okay, here's our agenda. Going to do a little bit of bashing myself before I let others bash, but Bron has graciously volunteered, or I told him to take notes for us, so thank you, Bron. First, we're going to go over all our active drafts. I'm going to talk real quickly about the wrong recipient and the IMAP JMAC keywords. I think John and or Lisa may have something to add to that based on what I've heard before we started. So I see Daniel online, so Daniel's going to discuss the UID batches draft and its current state. John's going to talk about the expires header field yet again. Unfortunately, Arndt has been ill most of the week, did not have time to put together a presentation for SMTP UTF-8, so we're going to skip over that. Neil's going to talk about OAuth profile, and Ben's going to talk about the email autoconfig. Then we've got some proposed work. We've got Simon going to talk about a new web push extension for IMAP. Lisa's going to talk about personal data portability archive. And then John is going to talk about email feedback reports and enhanced status codes for SMTP that go along with that. I'm probably going to flip that given your slides. Those two topics will probably be flipped, right? And then finally, we're going to have John. Oh, no, we already talked about that. And then we'll have any other business. And I don't see Alexi, but Alexi might have something that he's going to present to us later. Anyone want to bash the agenda before we get started? You're not officially on there, Alexi, but I talked to our new AD, and if you want to present your slides, I think it's probably good. Okay. Chances are we're going to have time. I think some of these slots are probably longer than we're actually going to take, and others might go a little long with discussion. If there's no bashing, let's actually get started. So, quote completed drafts. Wrong recipient URL went through, actually both of these drafts went through working group last call. Wrong recipient had a couple comments, mostly from Alexi and I, about updating the ABNF from one-click unsubscribe, which you did. Thank you for that. So at this point, yeah, we're just waiting on implementations. Lisa, did you want to? Yes. Lisa had some comments.
This shouldn't change anything substantive in the draft, but I thought that the security considerations could be greatly enhanced by some privacy considerations, many of which we all know, but this shares the characteristic of when you reply quickly to something that appears to be to the wrong recipient, you're giving information that it is a human on the other end, that they did reach somebody and that they did read it. So it's it's just a few things to add, I think, to warn implementers. And yeah, go ahead. You already know how to handle this.
Yeah, this is John. I mean, I agree with Lisa. Barry pointed out that there's a possible way to make fishing easier. Like you send a fish from one bank, and you say, no, this is not me. So the bad guy now says, oh, I'll try fishing him from a different bank. And for the implementations, for what it's worth, I have a small script that automatically clicks the button on all the spam I report, and it is already clicking the button to do this. Just because of the way we wrote this, half the time, if the script simply uses what's in the header, it'll work automatically. So I think we may have some implementations for it by default.
Are you aware of anybody on the sending side that would start to use this immediately, but has plans to? The client side seems like the trivial piece to implement.
Yeah, I know, but I will. I know where to ask. I'll see what I can do.
Anybody you can prod?
Might be.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So John, you'll add the privacy security. Take that to the list. If it looks like it's substantial enough to do another quick last call, we can certainly do that. The other draft that went through last call was the basically the just IANA stuff, registering IMAP and JMAP keywords and mailbox attributes. That pretty much went through with no comments, other than we added one more towards the end. I forget exactly which that one was, but it was pretty straightforward. And that's just waiting for a Shepherd write-up. I asked for volunteers on the list, didn't get any. Anybody in the room here want to put their hand up? Otherwise, either Jim, you do that? Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate that. Okay. Next up, UID batches. Daniel, I put this together because I wasn't sure if you're going to be here, but feel free to say whatever you need to say.
Yes, there's hopefully not a lot to say. Got a lot of good feedback, but mostly sort of smaller things. And I feel it's ready. Ken and I put together a sort of server and client implementation, and so that it actually works. I don't know if people want, I can give a big short recap of what it's all about, but it seems like people seem happy with where it's at.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, as Daniel said, I've got implementation of the Cyrus IMAP server. It's been running in production at Fastmail for at least 6 weeks, if not a couple months, and Daniel tested against it. We did I did a couple tweaks after he updated the document, so it is up to date with the current spec. Unless anybody else has major issues with it, I think it is ready for working group last call. Alexei.
Requesting last call and having more implementations are not mutually exclusive or not necessarily sequential. I think yes to both.
Yeah,
I'll try to get an implementation.
Yeah, I guess my question for my co-chair and the AD is one client, one server substantial enough to satisfy our charter, or should we hold off until we get more?
Short answer is I don't know.
That is a fair answer.
I think my brief skimming of the charter this morning, I think that is, no, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. Was the question whether you can do last call and implementation at the same time?
And I can do both sides, actually.
Oh, I didn't hear you volunteer to actually implement. That'd be fantastic.
Okay, is that clear up or okay?
Yeah, I think 2 and 2 would probably be sufficient. All right, thank you, Alexei. Okay, next up on our agenda is going to be John.
Sorry, quick pre-warning. I scanned the document and I think I have comments because the more recent version kind of a bit more wishy-washy than the original. it allows, so anyway, but I'm not quite ready to send the comments.
Do you
but
have an issue with the protocol elements or just the text describing them?
text describing allows too much flexibility, which I think I would like to tighten it back how it was.
Okay.
Yeah, it's explanatory text. I think it makes me feel that there are potentially interop issues because it allows too much. But
If you think that you're going to be able to implement fairly soonish, I'll hold off on the last call to see what kind of feedback you have as you're hacking your code. It literally took me about 20 minutes to implement the first go around in Cyrus. It's not very difficult. You could probably do it on a plane.
Except I'm not allowed to take my source code outside of the country I'm in, so I can't. But okay.
Yes.
No,
No, it works.
It works. Ooh, it works.
Look at that.
Okay.
We have skills.
Yes, the expires header field has.
You have been in the queue. I don't know if it's on the same topic on your document.
Okay. Yeah. The expires header field has been around for 40 years. Here's what it looks like. It was defined in 1983 for Usenet and in 1998 for translated X400 mail. And the idea is simply to have it mean the same thing for messages that are neither Usenet messages nor translated from X400. In 2022, we tried to AD sponsor it. 2 individuals who many of us know had strong objections and it failed. So the working group adopted it last fall. At MOG, I talked to some large mail providers, and the one with the exclamation point in its name said that as it was, they wouldn't implement it because they couldn't tell what expired meant well enough to know what to do with it. So what they wanted was something along the lines of expires because. It expires because it's a promotion that's over. It expires because it's a periodic notice that will be replaced in a time or something. But I have no idea how to choose the reasons, so I gave up. But then, about a month ago, we heard from some operators in France and elsewhere in Europe who said they have implemented it. So we have actual implementations using the definition that's in the draft. So I figured that if we have actual people using it, we might as well publish it because that's what we do. And we can consider it an expires because extension for some other time. And I think, yeah, that's it. So yeah, so my suggestion is that we revive it. I can give you the references for people who've implemented if you don't already have them. And then I think we should be able to advance it because it's already been around the barn a couple of times.
Do we have time to 2 minutes for Andy on why this got parked and why it's kind of never progressed before?
Yes.
Yeah. So you want to do it or I
Go ahead.
So expires is what you think it might be. It's this message loses value for some definition thereof. The problem is, what's the definition of loses value? Are we supposed to delete it? Are we supposed to ignore it? Are we supposed to flag to the user something? As he said, it's been around for 20, 30 years in email. It was never defined what it means. It's just that there is a mapping from X400 over to regular mail. So because of the fact that implementations that might have appeared in the 90s do something with it that no one ever wrote down, we can't standardize it. That was basically the argument against this. Or why it got us to this park state. Come up.
There was also an argument that I found unpersuasive that mail providers would use it to silently delete mail from underneath people, which I didn't find that persuasive, but the argument was repeated frequently and loudly.
Yeah. So that's what gets us to here. And we're trying to figure out, do we finally have enough momentum to say this is worth standardizing with that name and possibly with this extension on top of it?
The people who implemented it are bulk mailers. So my guess is, in practice, it's mostly going to be time limited promotions. Buy this widget this week while it's on sale.
Okay, so back to you. Thanks.
So we do have implementations of this, and the fact that we are also X400 vendor, it's actually irrelevant because my implementation is purely internet, is a webmail. And it doesn't delete it underneath. It just displayed it as expired. And also when you compose a message, you can say that the message is expired, and we'll have some use cases. So yes, can we get this done, please?
And Ben.
So I think this is potentially very, very useful, but as a client implementer, I have the two questions that were already discussed. As a client implementer, I would not know what to do with that. I saw the website which promotes this as a green thing, that this saves cloud storage because these emails don't have to be saved anymore, which implies that it will be deleted. Otherwise, it would not have that advantage. If it gets deleted, there's the obvious abuse potential that I send email and then I make it disappear on people. We would obviously don't want that. So there needs to be some guidance on what the client is supposed to do with this. Am I supposed to delete it? Am I supposed to archive it? Am I supposed to put a label on it? Am I supposed to, I don't know, put it down in the queue or make it gray, or I don't know what is supposed to happen with that if I'm not supposed to delete it. And if I'm supposed to delete it, what about the abuse? And so that is a question that needs some kind of answer. And the second thing is, yes, the reason why this expired might be interesting as well. Is that a one-time code that has been sent to me and expires in a few minutes? Or is it an advertising? Or is it just my friend who wants to send me something and then decline that he ever sent it?
I think Pete might have a response for you, Ben.
So this is Pete, and I think I do have a response. And I actually think Ben's questions are all interesting and good. And actually, I think Ben's questions are exactly why we should publish this. The idea that this is out there, this exists, and that clients might not know what to do with it, or that servers, frighteningly enough, might not know what to do with it, is an important point. And I think it's worth this document saying exactly what the objectors to this document are saying. We say, just because you've seen expires does not mean you can blindly delete this. This is user information. So you may, as a client implementer, want to easily implement a filter for the user to put them all in some mailbox, or you might want to label them with some color or some flashing lights or some lack of flashing lights because it is no longer as relevant. That the only thing this is telling you is that the sender is giving you a piece of information that for some purpose, this message is expired. And it should be up to the end user, the receiver of the message, how to display that, or bless them, if the user wants to actually delete the message, you can give them that option too. That any of these things are legitimate, but it is a end user desired thing to do something with the expires. And should in the future we get an expires, because that will give the user more opportunity to make those decisions. So I think the answer to Ben is no, you aren't going to get specific information about what to do, but you're going to get some advice that will allow the user to do interesting things with it.
Yeah. Chair hat off. I agree with Pete 100%. Ron.
I just wanted to say, can we agree that the green saves power thing is marketing fluff? It's bullshit that we shouldn't take into account. It has no technical bearing on anything, and it's not true.
There was an email to the list. Oh, okay. Jim.
Hi, Jim Fenton. I'm not in favor of expires because, at least from the get-go, but I am a little bit curious about what I don't think I understand the motivation for it. I mean, if it's expires because maybe the sale has ended, I'm not sure that, I mean, I can sort of infer that from the fact that it came from my corner grocery store, that it was because the sale ended rather than that the news article expired or something like that. So if, you know, if somebody could, just for informational purposes, I'd like to understand a little bit more about why they think that's important.
I'm not sure anybody in the room was actually pushing the expires, because I think it was a response to
Right.
not liking expires as it currently stands.
Right. No, it was mentioned as a mail provider with an exclamation point that we all know well.
This is John. I can try and ask him what his motivation is.
Hans-Jörg.
Hans-Jörg Happel-Outwiger. Trying probably to answer a little bit, because I'm also pondering on the expire because shortly is, I think we have seen by the client discussion that there might be multiple ways a client might deal with that, like, demoting it versus maybe highlighting it or something like that, and understanding so demoting because, for instance, the promotion is over, but it could be highlighted shortly before it's over or something like that. Yeah. So, or like an event you were invited to, you need to reply to, something like that. So I think for that reasons, I could imagine a client might want to understand that, but maybe client people can answer that better. So the point I wanted to make is actually, this is actually on a semantic layer, of course, so it makes it probably also tricky to really think about that. And there might be some cross relation also here to SML, because like Ben mentions a use case about confirmation codes or something like that. That is a use case we have in the SML use case document as well. And there's probably the idea to have that also in the schema for the confirmation code to say when does it expire somehow. So I just want to say there's maybe a link here. I don't think that is contradicting or something like that. So I would probably, because there's always mails that won't have SML, so I think it's perfectly fine to also have that header. But probably in the SML world, there would be also a solution for the expires, because to a certain extent, if you want to convey that information, you could use some structured schema to explain what is the data in the mail, and that could help probably also the client to make a decision. So maybe that's some interesting input for people discussing that, if that could be a solution here.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ben, do you mind if I jump in and follow up on Pete's answer to your question before you come back
real
in?
quick before you start, Barry, if you wouldn't mind. Just heads up, I've closed the queue after Bron, so we can move on. And those that are coming to the mic, if you have any feelings on whether you think this should be standards track or informational, please let us know.
Go ahead, Barry.
Hi, this is Barry Lieba. I was just going to throw out a user interface that I envision for this. Gmail will suppress images in a message to reduce tracking. It has a little thing that I can click that says show the images, and it has another thing I can click that says always show images from this sender. And I would envision a always delete expired messages from this sender as an option the user would have to sort of say, these are coming from Macy's. Any expired messages from Macy's, it's okay for you to delete them. That's the kind of thing that I foresee. And to answer Ken's question, which was
Proposed standard or informational?
Yes, I think it should be proposed standard because it is proposing a standard.
We'll put that in the chapter, right?
Ben?
Agreed with John Levine, it should be a standard. So I'm in favor of this to answer earlier questions from Jim Fallon. This is useful for systematically sent mail. For example, I'm getting lots of mail for your parcel is coming today, it's coming tomorrow. All this can be no longer relevant next week. One-time codes, advertising. If you look at your mailbox, an average mailbox, like 90% of that is no longer relevant in a few weeks. So that is actually very useful. I'm in favor of standardizing that. I'm just saying that if we are in agreement that this email must not automatically be deleted from the user without user agreement, that needs to be explicitly in the specifications. Exactly because there is this marketing initiative out there, and I agree it's complete marketing nonsense, Bron is right, but it is there, and there's some large email providers in there who are hosting this storage, and there is a risk if they're saying this that they will delete the email. So if we don't want that, we need to be in there.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in the room is advocating that the server can delete stuff unsolicited, and we can certainly spell that out in the document. Right. Carol.
I think this should be standard track, and I think we should go forward it, but I don't think we are in the hurry, which is why I think we should also we should standardize the expires because it makes it much more useful in that way if we actually know what it is. I mean, we are not in the hurry that it is already out there. People are already using it. Now we're just standardizing that. And if we actually standardize it, it would be nice to have also some features that would be useful for the future case and not coming back in 2 years and add and then people have already implemented expires and then, oh, now I need to modify it again and so on. That's why I was thinking about
Are you suggesting we do expires because in the same draft or
yeah, in
separate
the same
draft?
draft.
Okay.
Because I mean, that would make so that people actually would implement it. That would also give, client, because this is going to be the hint for clients anyway. And if the client writers get more kind of, control on what kind of information, why this is expiring, they might actually select more, better, strategy to actually show this up to the user.
Brown.
I was going to say the opposite, that I thought we should just standardize expires by itself without the expires but it doesn't seem like a huge lift to standardize the expires because header as an optional thing. You can also set up a registry, have 1 or 2 items in it. That's not going to be too much text. And then we can just let it sit there. You don't have to set it if you don't want to. You don't have to look at it if you don't want to. So I've changed my mind in between sitting down there and standing up here. I do believe it should be a standards track. I do believe we should do it. And I do believe we shouldn't sit on it forever. The naysayers have their loud arguments that providers will do stuff anyway. A bad provider that deletes stuff that the user doesn't want deleted is going to find themselves not being an email provider for people pretty quickly. Yeah. People really don't like emails disappearing. Providers have already run into problems when they create interfaces that give people less feeling of control over their email. I don't think it'll happen.
One of Keith's points was that delete should be something you opt into, not something, right? Okay. And I don't hear any objection to that, or I don't think I've ever heard. On expires, because, go ahead, Barry.
Just not speaking for Keith, but what I remember him saying was that he had no objection to a system that allows the user to say, delete all my expired messages. He just didn't want it to be done without the user explicitly saying.
That's what I recall too. So 2 quick things just so I can get the organization of this in my head. We don't want to do expires because merge it into expires. So we want to leave the format of expires the same, and this is an add. Okay, good. Right. Can those 2 be in one document, or are we talking 2 documents here? Sorry? John will do a draft and see if we like it. I mean, I don't have a preference. I just want to sort of know what the plan of attack is. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next is OAuth, but MeetEcho is not letting me stop sharing these slides. Are you on the main? Oh, there it goes.
I just hit the revoke.
Okay. Neil, do you want to drive, or do you want me to drive for you?
You can drive.
Okay.
Okay. Let's get into it. This is the OAuth profile for Open Public clients. So a very quick recap. At the moment, the only standardized way, interoperable way of authenticating from an IMAP or CalDAV or CarDAV client is via basic username and password. These have many, many security problems I hope I don't have to go into. And there is a lot of desire across the industry from particularly hosters, but also some clients to move to something different. And everywhere else, that thing is OAuth, and that's mostly what people would like to do here too. And so what we're trying to do is create a profile that doesn't define anything new in OAuth, but puts together one way of doing things in a secure way that works interoperably without requiring servers and clients to pre-register with each other, because that would not scale to all the many, many servers and clients out there. Okay, so next slide, please. there's just a few of the many problems that passwords have. Okay, next slide again, please. And one more, because I'm not very synced up with my stuff. So the big, so since last time, we put out a call for adoption on the initial draft, and had good support for that, and the draft is now adopted by the working group. We've also had a bunch of feedback sent through, which has been great, and I've published an updated draft a few days ago, which contained updates based on all that feedback. So if we go to the next slide, please. So what's changed since the last meeting based on this feedback? I'll just give a quick summary of the main things. Next slide, please. So the main thing is defining standard scopes, because for OAuth to work, you need scopes, which are kind of strings that are associated with capabilities. And what we had agreed in discussion with a bunch of mailbox providers before was to just go with very basic kind of the string of like IMAP, CalDAV, etc. But the main thing is not really what they're called. It's that it will create a registry where you can define these and add them so that we don't have name collisions. So the draft now creates a registry and registers the basic protocols that we think will want to use this. Next slide, please. There's also just a bunch of nits that have been fixed. Some good feedback from Kai, who's at 1&1, I think, who pointed out well-known paths have to be just against an origin, so we can't use, can't be any path involved in your OAuth issuer, so that's now been restricted down. We don't need the redirect URI being unique per service you register with is unnecessary in the face of issue identification, which we've added as a stronger protection from the OAuth options. So we've removed kind of unnecessary requirement there, and just some clearer pros, and also just a bunch of error handling cases, references again to the specs of if you hit an error, this is where you'll find the correct response to return. Next slide, please. The other main thing was adding a discussion and some requirements around how long tokens and the client IDs that are issued via dynamic client registration must be valid for compliance with this spec, which just makes sure that you have something reasonable on which to build a client. So that's all been added. Next slide, please. So that's where we're up to. So I think, honestly, it's in a really good shape right now, this document. The next steps are mainly actually implementations, so that we can check that it works as we hope and expect. But the other thing that we're waiting on is auto discovery, because we think that's a very key component for this to work well. So as we talked about last time, we want to define a new, very simple auto discovery mechanism where you can go from just an email address to finding the list of like IMAP, CalDAV server, and the OAuth authentication server to connect to in order to authenticate with it. So we're kind of blocked slightly on that, but other than that, I believe it's, yeah, in really good shape. Next slide, please. Is there one?
No, that's the,
No, that's the end. Cool, good, because I didn't really have anything else to say. So that's where we're up to. Any questions, I guess?
Yep, thank you, Neil. Have you got Barry?
This is Barry Liba. I'm not a fan of OAuth. I think it's significantly flawed for a number of reasons. That said, I think it solves the sorts of problems you're talking about. It's better than using plain passwords and passing them around. So I support going forward with this, but I'd like to make sure that we don't do this instead of looking for better solutions to the don't use password mechanisms, you know, that we look at other mechanisms as well. I'm afraid that once we put OAuth in, we'll just have the response that, well, OAuth is the way we do it, and we will abandon other options.
Jim.
Hi, Jim Fenton. Two comments here. One is that, and kind of along the same lines as Barry, there's a lot of subtlety to OAuth, and there are modes that are deprecated because they've been found to not be secure. And there's a lot of sort of continuing. There's a zillion different OAuth modes. I can't keep them all straight. I can't keep any of them straight. We really need to be coordinating with people who are experts in OAuth. So there is a definite security area angle to this. I was glad to see Daniel Gilmore is here, at least virtually. And but we need to coordinate closely with the OAuth working group on that. The other thing is, and I think there was some discussion on the mailing list about whether this means that you need to have a web browser, you need to use a web browser in order to authenticate to your email client. And I'm hoping that there is some way that we can do this natively in an email client, that we can implement some sort of two-factor authentication thing directly in IMAP, JMAP, whatever, that will talk OAuth in the background. I'm not a fan of requiring that you have to use a browser to do all kinds of stuff like that. So thanks.
So just responding to both of those. So for the first point, I started actually taking this to the OAuth working group. It's been kind of looked at by at least one of the experts there, and also discussed at one of the meetings there. As I said, the point was not to define anything new in that, and we have very much just chosen the best practice for all of these things and got rid of all the options, because as you say, there are many ways you can shoot yourselves in the foot otherwise. So obviously this would go for review when we have finished with it, via the OAuth working group mailing list and stuff as well. But I think we're not going to have too many issues there. To address the second one, OAuth absolutely requires a browser. This is not an issue for most use cases, but if you have a use case it doesn't cover, that's fine. You will have to use a different authentication mechanism. You shouldn't try and make one thing cover everything.
Ben.
So I share very much what Barry Laber said. I'm also worried about that this will be the end of it all solution, that there will not be other alternatives. But straight, just for information, there is one other proposal called SASL passkeys. It's a SASL mechanism to directly use passkeys within the mail program without a browser. It's in the Kitten working group. I recommend you to take a look at that. There's a draft out there. But Barry or anybody else, Jim Felton, if you have other ideas, please propose them, because I have the exact same worry that once we standardize this, there will be so much industry push behind that this will be the only way to log in, and there will not be alternatives. And then if you don't have a browser, you're out of luck. So that is my personal worry on this. But the only way to counter that is to have good alternatives. And if you have any suggestions, please suggest them.
Lisa.
I have to rethink what I was going to say because of the excellent points raised just before me. This is Lisa Dussault. I agree that overall OAuth is very complex, but I think I'm not worried by the approach taken here, because we're specifically selecting a profile exactly like the presenter said. So I think that's good. The fact of needing a browser is today inherent in OAuth, but if we make progress in using OAuth in apps that have front ends, not browsers, I think it's addressable. It technically doesn't. It seems eminently solvable if we decide there's enough demand for that, and then that could build on gracefully. I also encourage folks to look at, if you can find it, if you can't, I'll provide a link. The live online account portability for ActivityPub proposal that I've got out there in another venue, W3C venues, which uses OAuth, and the personal data portability archive stuff leads towards another use of OAuth. So I think OAuth is going to be very highly leveraged by a number of proposals, and implementers will find it very familiar and pretty quickly if they don't already. So I'm in favor of it. Requires good work.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Neil said, before this work came here, Neil presented it in the OAuth group. They were comfortable with what he had started with. They are so backlogged that they were happy to have us work on it here, with the provision that once we think we're complete, they will review it along with our working group last call. So we'll have the oversight that we need. Graham.
Hi, Graham Wardorf, Apple. Totally agree with all the other points of the problems with passwords and how we need to move along, and OAuth solves many of the problems. One of the problems that we've had repeatedly with OAuth is sort of the legal agreement and the in-way legal agreement that requires with this, and that has definitely caused issues with this in the past. It would be great, which we usually don't have with the username and password plan. It would be great if we had something, I think, to Barry's point of, if we have one and only one way that we're going to move beyond this, I'm worried that OAuth will get us down a path where everything involves another legal agreement that is definitely problematic at internet scale.
Just addressing that one, like the point of this one is there really couldn't be a legal agreement because it's open for any client to register. If you require a legal agreement, then you wouldn't be able to support this because you wouldn't be able to restrict clients doing this. And I mean, that's already the situation now with providers, but we think this is a way of providing that, those extra security and OAuth capabilities in a way that doesn't require that pre-agreement. We can't force companies to support any protocol you define, but if we have this specification, then there's a much higher chance that it will be available rather than if it doesn't exist.
Ron.
I wanted to answer Ben's thing. I was in the kitten session yesterday. I supported Ben's position on the passkey draft, that it would be great if any program could act as a browser for the key storage system on devices. That's not where we're at now. And to be fair about where that draft is, it's an individual draft that has been proposed within the working group. The working group did not seem inclined to receive it well. It certainly doesn't look like it's going to progress within that working group. So I don't think it's something we should be waiting on or planning on as any near-term future for how we authenticate mail clients in a way that's better than usernames and passwords. We have really two choices at the moment: OAuth or develop something better from scratch. And I don't think develop something better from scratch has a short time frame.
Vittorio.
Hi, Vittorio Bertola, Open Exchange. I just wanted to note that we do see demand in the market for this. And it's especially important to keep independent email viable, because nowadays the fact that you can have multi-factor authentication or web-based multi-factor authentication with the main consumer-enabled services, but not with your own stuff, because there's no standard way to launch a process. It is something that is, again, pushing towards a centralization. So I think it's important to find something that can be supported by each and every IMAP server, especially. I think that IMAP has a capability, by the way, to tell the client that he needs to do two-factor authentication and provide the URI. So that in terms of auto-discovery, I think we even have already what's necessary. So all in favor.
Ben.
By the way, thank you, Bron, for supporting that yesterday. But I wanted to answer to Graham from Apple. One way, my worry is that if we standardize that, people will take parts of it and then they will still require the client ID, just simply out of market pressure. So one way to deal with that is to nail down the specification really, really hard. And there needs to be musts in there everything that we need to depend on needs to be a must. And then the mail clients, the important mail clients, the big ones that the providers look for, including Apple Mail, Thunderbird, whatever, they need to enforce that. So when they implement the specification, they will check whether the provider follows these musts and simply deny connection if they don't follow that, and not bend on that by signing client ID contracts or something like this, which are not available to others. If the big if the big email clients take a hard stance on enforcing that, the small ones have a chance to be on the same level. But that's the only way that I see out of that, Apple Mail and Thunderbird enforcing those.
Lisa.
I'm trying to square what I heard from Neil and the gentleman in the back about legal agreements, because my understanding is that it would be perfectly possible to insert a legal agreement page in the OAuth flow when first trying to use when first trying to use a desktop client. If there's a legal agreement that the user needs to make to go ahead with this, then it's perfectly possible to put up an agreement and say, yes, I agree, I know what I'm doing, as part of the OAuth flow. We're all on the same page on that?
Microphone, please.
The specific issue here is client vendor to server vendor legal agreements. The user is not in the loop here. This is an agreement between the authors of the two bits of software to talk together.
So yeah, and I think just to clarify on that one just slightly more a sec. And so at the moment with OAuth, you have to pre-register. So if I'm writing email client X and I want to work with big mail provider G, I have to go up to G and get an agreement with them and sign all the legal documents, and then they'll give me a client ID, and now my client can do OAuth. And so with this specification, that wouldn't be required because you don't have to pre-register to get the client ID. The whole point of this is that an unknown client can use OAuth to connect to an arbitrary server. Now, if the server allows username and password, that also doesn't require an agreement. There's no reason why they shouldn't allow this. It doesn't lose them anything. They just get a more secure way, so less likely to have users lose their passwords, get hacked, etc. So it's a win-win, I would have said. If service providers want to shut off all access without legal agreement, there's nothing the IETF can do that's going to stop that. That is not a protocol problem. That is a society community issue, and so it's irrelevant really to this discussion.
Thank you. That fixed my mistake, which was thinking it was a user service provider agreement. As a client software to service provider agreement, I agree we can't have those N by N. It doesn't scale. It makes an unhealthy ecosystem. And I welcome offline questions about the trust registry I'm building.
Anything else on OAuth before we move on?
Hope that we might see some implementations by next IETF. If anyone wants to do that, that would be great.
Thank you, Neil. Next up is going to be autoconfig.
Yes. Hi. And Ken, I'm happy for you to do the slides.
Okay.
So autoconfig, that's been around since about, next slide, please. That's been around for about 15 years in Thunderbird, where it solved a big problem. It's been used with great success. Currently, it helps about 100,000 users every day to configure their email. That's about the size of a company of 1,000 employees working full-time since 15 years. This is about how much time this has saved. It's implemented by about 10 email applications, and you know most of them, Thunderbird, K9 Mail, Delta Chat, Evolution, and many others. Many domains have this enabled. It's I was actually surprised to see a recent survey that is roughly on par with Microsoft Exchange Auto Discover, which I never had hoped being possible. And so there is deployment for this. I have not encountered, or I'm not aware of any major issues that this has caused, neither in operation, in deployment, nor systemic problems. I've never heard of any security problems that this caused in reality. So there's like 15 years of history of it proven to work. There is an RFC. There's an RFC draft out there, and it has been adopted by the working group a while ago, which documents the standards and standardize what is being used in the field, with a few standardizations and generalizations and future-proofing it, and compatible with what is being deployed already. The draft has already made a number of rounds. Last Sunday, I had like a 12-hour, 13-hour nonstop session to improve it further. Now all the definitions have been nailed down fairly clearly. All elements have been documented, the requirements on it, and there's like 30 pages of text now. I'm fairly confident that this is now in a good state to be published. It might need some technical things like IANA registration stuff needs to be looked over, whether this is formally correct in the quotes, but otherwise it's done. So I would like to, this is ready for last call. I would be happy for this to be published.
Before I address the last call request, Neil, or Lisa, did you have a question on this, or are you still in queue previously? Neil, do you have a question on this draft or a comment on this draft?
Yes, I just want to clarify, because this is not on the standards track. So it's not a standard. This is an informational draft documenting the existing behavior of Thunderbird and existing deployments. Like when we discussed this at the last IETF, there were a number of reasons we didn't think this was suitable as a standard, including the many different ways it tries to auto discover where this file lives in ways that are never going to get past security review. And so the plan was also to document this existing work, but also to publish a separate draft that would be kind of a new way going forward. It was much simpler, that we would
I'm going to talk about that just after.
Yeah. Just wanted to clarify that for the working group.
Yeah. The current draft is informational. So regarding working group last call, I have no reason to doubt Ben that he thinks this is ready, and I can certainly review it from a grammatical standpoint. I do not personally know the format well enough to give it a technical review. I'm wondering if anybody in the room or online is familiar with the format that can review it to make sure that Ben didn't miss anything or got anything correct. Or do we know anybody that we could reach out to on the list to do a review? I'm hearing crickets. Oh.
So I'm the original author of this, so I'm fairly certain that this is correct, but I can ask, if you want a third-party check, I can ask some people who have implemented that or somebody else to double-check that against the implementations. Would that be good?
That'd be sufficient, I think.
Yep. Good.
Thank you, Ben.
Okay, we can do that.
Also solves the two implementers problem. Right. Okay. You ready to move on to your next slide?
Yep. So Neil already hinted at that. So there is demand from the IETF and internal here to make a new variant. The main concern with the previous one is that it's relying on a hard-coded name, a well-known name, autoconfig, and then a well-known path. and that's not the way things are being done at the IETF. So the new proposal is proposing to use DNS server records and JSON for that. Otherwise, the basic concept is the same. The form of expression is somewhat different. It's currently being dubbed PAC, P-A-C-C, PACs. I think there was a suggestion from Ron a while ago. I think Neil had some other suggestions. Whatever suggestions you have, feel free to bike shed. I don't care. I made a first draft, which I uploaded embarrassingly an hour ago, but it's out there. If it hasn't hit the mailing list yet, I can post it again. There's some difference to the previous autoconfig. One is that it's assuming best practices. Not only that it requires DNS server, but it also, for example, assumes that the username is equal to the email address, or at least the email address will be accepted as a username in all the servers, which is a very good idea. Every server should work like that. Unfortunately, not every server out there does work like that. So this cannot reflect some existing servers. But that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to that the email provider can publish their configuration and make it easy for users. So the expectation is that the email provider will adapt their configuration to make this work. So that's a principal and fundamental difference. The other one is obviously that autoconfig is already widely deployed, won't go away soon. So it's valid to have both of them having RSC for both of them. Next slide. So here's the two drafts that you can look at, and yes, questions.
Jim.
Hi, Jim Fenton. Could you go back a slide, please? So I always wince a little bit when somebody uses the term best practices, because that always, there are a lot of things that are promoted. A lot of bad ideas have been promoted as best practices, like rotating your password every week or something like that. But username equals email address. I'm aware of lots of places that for various reasons, and I'm not sure that whether they're good, how good it is, but for example, I have a government email address that is different from my username, and that is an intentional thing. We're supposed to sort of keep our usernames sort of confidential and use like jim.fenton@ domain as our email address. So I'm not convinced that username equals email address is a good assumption to make.
You're welcome to make another proposal. So that is clearly a limitation in this proposal here. If there's no relation between your username and your email address, you will not be able to set this up automatically unless there is some specific provision to that. So if you have suggestions how to solve that problem in the case that you have in mind, feel free to make a suggestion.
Daniel.
I think it's also important to stress that autoconfig is not supposed to work for 100% of use cases. The point is that it works for most use cases and makes setup easy for most users. And if there is some server configuration or some client or whatever that doesn't work with it, that's totally fine. The point of auto configuration is not to solve everything. It's this kind of a bit similar to OAuth. Like even if the thing we talked about a few minutes ago goes through and becomes standard and lots of people use it, there will still be lots and lots of servers that use username and password. There'll be lots of clients. And this is kind of similar. It's supposed to make things easier, but you can always manually configure your email client. It's just helping users.
Hans-Jörg.
Sorry, this is Hans-Jörg. Slightly disagreeing a little bit with Daniel, so I think we should at least think about also how can we make it helpful probably for additional groups of users. And I know another use case than the one Jim mentioned, and that is some hosters who have kind of like decentralized multi-server instances without a central email proxy. They will also have issues, or they will use sometimes usernames for the authentication, for the login into IMAP. So we see that very often actually with clients migrating with our service, that they have trouble setting up with their clients afterwards in those cases. So one quick idea, I didn't really think too deeply through it, but maybe one could define something like a fallback here, where there is potentially a special kind of a third thing besides the username and the email address, which encodes something like the actual server which is used for the configuration, where there might be a well-known or something like that. So that could fit also in that flow somehow. So something like a virtual email address or something like that. Because at the moment, I think it's also an issue for the providers of these username-based authentications, that it's just difficult for them to give users a way to set up the client. But yeah, maybe we can think about that also on the list or offline. But I think it's definitely worth thinking about that a little bit.
Pete. This is Pete Resnick. I'm a little confused here. My experience of autoconfig does not require username to be identical to email address. It requires email address to be the thing you provide to the autoconfig such that it can start looking, because it looks at the right-hand side of the @ and takes that domain name and then starts passing that to the server. At that point, the server can then prompt that it needs the username and password. It doesn't need to be identical, so long as it's able to ask for that information in the second step, it doesn't matter. I can auto-configure based on the email address so long as the user has the ability to enter a different credential when the server prompts for it. So if this doesn't allow for that, that seems like a limitation that's different in this than it is in other systems. And certainly Microsoft, I have multiple different logins that are associated with an email address, as I remember. Anyway, I don't think it should be a necessity. It's normal, but it's not a necessity.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
So to your confusion, Pete, so there's this autoconfig where can you just go? Yeah, in autoconfig you go to a URL at the ISP and at the domain of the ISP, and you submit the username as part of the URL query. And there the ISP can adapt the autoconfig file with the username in there. And so there is a way, a mapping, if the ISP wants to do that, to do this. Regarding asking the user about that, I find that unfair. You are clearly able to know your username. I'm sometimes already struggling with Windows Exchange stuff. What is my username? In which format it is, and I don't actually know. And normal users will really even know less. And the server does know. So if it knows the email address, it knows definitely what user that is. So basically, this is pushing the problem. Like, I think it's unfair to push the problem to the user. It should be something that the email provider knows and should solve for that. And for cases that just finished, and for cases where there are advanced setups where this is not possible or not wanted, you can always go into the manual setup and do it this way.
Yeah, and look, I don't disagree with you on that. As a matter of ease of configuration for the user, this document saying not requiring the user to have to provide another piece of authentication data beside their password is really the best idea. That's perfectly reasonable to say. I think insisting that the username part of the credential is identical to the email address is where you're probably pushing things a little too far. And it is that sort of best practice sort of language versus hard requirement language. I don't think we really disagree in principle on don't make the user have to remember something else. What you really want is you can tell your user their email address and their password will be asked for, and that should be sufficient. And beyond that, just don't over constrain particular back-end implementation.
Right. I agree with you on that, and this is why I highlighted this. This is actually not just entirely my proposal. This came out of a group discussion, what happened at Make Bagel Email. So I'm basically just documenting what the group decided here. But I'm with you on this. Would you be happier if I replace best practices with policy?
Well, I mean, I think it's.
We don't need to wordsmith here.
Yeah, I don't. I think we can come up with some way of saying, you know, easiest practice might be or something or other. But yeah, it's when these things turn into recipes where you say you must do it this way, then what you're going to end up with is servers that do dumb things on the back end. That would be bad. So I agree with Ken. It's probably just wordsmithing.
Yeah, we need to move on, but I'm going to allow Bron and Hans-Jörg to go up. And now that we have a 0-0 draft, we can take this to the list and we can start bashing the text as we see fit there.
Yeah, I've certainly seen systems where you need to give some kind of organization identifier as well as the email address, and that could be particularly handy in cases where a provider is not necessarily an email provider and is trying to use autoconfig, and you have the cross-domain problem that you're logging into Apple with your email account from somewhere else, for example, to access the calendar system, and they allow you to log in with an email address which is not owned by their domain. Whether we want to support that or not in here, I'm happy to say this handles the 90% case with minimal stuff and try that first. And then if we discover that this isn't handling a bunch of cases, come out with a draft that handles that later rather than trying to boil the ocean straight away.
Yeah, if you're a user that is sophisticated enough to have a complex config, you probably know how to configure your own client.
Hans-Jörg, data portability and migration enthusiast. So slightly contradicting a little bit what you both said right now, because I would argue it's so like the situation when you switch a provider is probably one of the major use cases for reconfiguring your client. And in that situation, you might have situations where, for instance, an email address is simply existing at both the source and the destination at the same time. So I think there is more than like 10% of these cases where this might be happening. And this is actually also in the current autoconfig. So Ben said there is actually autoconfig, existing in something like Thunderbird and so on. And this is actually one of the main cases where this currently messes up. So I think if we put in something new here, we should, I think, think about actually how to support also these major cases in a better way, which are currently not covered by the existing approach.
Hans-Jörg, we can talk offline about a solution for the problem that you're mentioning.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Next up, that completes our existing work. Now we have proposed work. Simon, do you want to drive the slides yourself, or would you like me to do that for you?
Yes, please, because I have a lot of slides to skip.
Let me find you here. Okay, you should have control.
Yes, I am. So I'm gonna talk about web push for IMAP. Web push defines a way to get real-time events. This is particularly used in a mobile environment. This can be also used in other use case. For example, during the migration of to a new server. There is a need for real-time events with email. This is why JMap has supported web push from the beginning. For mobile environments, proprietary softwares have implemented their own API. And this draft brings web push to IMAP. There is already one implementation for a server, MOX, and we know there are some clients that are interested, and it may interest other mail clients for webmail or mobile clients. I just added 2 conventions to indicate push messages, but maybe we won't see them. I've made a few design choices. The main one was to avoid unnecessary complexity. It's okay to get push messages. We just have to ignore it uses insignificant resources. It is done in a way we can easily implement synchronizations on a push message. And I wanted the extension to not depend on another one. And also, I've made Vapid requirements because many push server requires it. So the extension had 5 commands: 1 to get the Vapid public key of the server, 1 to subscribe to new for new push subscription, 1 to acknowledge a new subscription to avoid the security issue, and 1 to list subscription, and another to silence it. So basically, it works in a way that the user agents first take the Vapid key of the server, then use it to subscribe to the push server, and use the new endpoint to subscribe it to the IMAP server. The IMAP server sends a token to the client through the push server to be sure that the push server is working and as expected. And the user agents send back the token. After that, when an event is recorded by the IMAP server, it sends a push message through the push server, and the client may pass the content of the push message or choose to synchronize with the server. So I will skip this. As I said, there is one important thing about security with web push, because it may be used as a DDoS amplification when many clients register just an endpoint, and then they send many messages to this account to make the IMAP server send a lot of requests. But thanks to the verification of the endpoint with the token, the risk is greatly reduced. With this extension, we need to register the web push capability. There are still some pending questions. Should we add the counter associated to each push notifications to detect out of order or undelivered events? Should we add a way for the client to subscribe only for some events? How we do handle the compression? And there are a few questions about the formal syntax.
Thank you, Simon. Any questions or comments on this? This work certainly falls under the purview of our charter. Is there any interest in working on something along these lines? Graham.
Just to weigh in, this is Graham Orndorff, just to weigh in a little bit of some of your questions there about should you, sorry about that, hopefully it's better. This is Graham Orndorff, just to weigh in on some of your questions that you had before of should you be able to sort of better specify at what point you get a push notification. There are definitely battery life considerations. It's not necessarily a no-op to get pushes that you don't expect or that are throwaway. They're on mobile devices. There's definitely concerns with that. So being able to pre-register with limiting what pushes you, if you're talking about like everything that you would get as an example down an IMAP idle channel over the push channel just by registering this, you certain devices are definitely going to react negatively to that. So having the ability to kind of pre-register certain conditions which you could push may be useful.
Hans-Jörg.
Hans-Jörg, migration enthusiast again. So I think that could be actually an interesting, feature also in a migration setting, for instance, to learn about, when an account had been receiving new email instead of polling, stuff like that. Or for us, it's also a little bit hard to make constant IMAP idle connections in those cases because, we don't have all the time migration server running for accounts being migrated. So in that sense, that could be really an interesting thing. Question probably for the room would be a little bit, I have no idea from a server side of things, how could I expect even that this is implemented? Is it hard or easy? Because it sounds a little bit like something, that IMAP servers typically don't do at the moment. So I just would like to be interested in having some idea about that.
Ben.
So I think this is super useful to have in IMAP. I have this concrete problem when I want to publish a mobile mail client on Apple or Android, and they won't let me keep a TCP connection open. iOS will simply kill me, and there's no good solution to that. And I don't want to route the emails in through cloud server on my own, and I don't want to have the password of the user. So that solves a real problem for mobile devices. So I think that would be really, really good to have that in the common email servers. Regarding the specific specification, I have quite some reservations about that. Some of them are exactly the same thing that Graham said, that I would like to specify exactly what kind of notifications I want to have. Is this only for new emails? Is it for changes to existing emails? Is it in other folders and only in the inbox? This needs to be there, and and there were a few other major things in this particular proposal that I had some concerns about, but the problem is really, really important and needs to be solved.
Bron.
Sounded a bit like a question for you and me, Ken. How difficult would this to be as a server? We already do it for JMAP. We do it for the Apple push protocol specifically on our server. Adding another protocol would be reasonably easy, I imagine. We certainly have the events on the server. We know when something's happened, putting a trigger to fire off a request. The hard bit's just the data management around subscriptions, but we already do that for other things. I think most servers would have a similar situation. So I guess the question for the working group is there enough people committed to implementing this to make this work progress? The competitor to this obviously is JMAP push. So as a JMAP person, maybe I have an incentive to push people across to JMAP rather than encouraging them to stay in IMAP. But I also think if there's enough interest in this, then we should do it.
Alexia, I saw you nodding. Did you have a comment?
No.
Okay, sounds like we can take this to the list and see if there's enough interest to make this a working group item. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
No. Okay, next up is Lisa.
Okay, I can jump and reach the mic and stay warm. Okay.
Lisa, you can use the clicker.
Okay. We wanted to make it easier to do personal productivity data, export and import, backup and restore, and account transfer. And it seemed to me that there was a fairly straightforward thing to define based on a lot of existing standards to fill a gap and to build upon. So we have plans, Hans-Jörg and Alexi and myself, to build on a fairly straightforward export format. It's not going to be a short spec because it pulls together a bunch of things, but it'll be a medium spec when we flesh it out with more, what do you call them, format schemas, and explain exactly how all the pieces fit together and how you can reconstruct a user's personal data folders and everything in another environment or restore it. We thought about what could be done and how it could be done and what use cases different approaches would solve. And we think we found a sweet spot where some really interesting use cases could be solved without, while still remaining very simple. And use cases that can't be solved with the simple approach, I will certainly personally strongly advocate for doing those in extensions or in other mechanisms. See that button? Forward. Great. So the approach is to use EML files because EML files are so specialized and so well understood by systems that use EML files that we don't want to mess with that. But use JSON, prefer JSON for things that come in two flavors like contacts and calendar items. Prefer JSON and not actually include the other format. And to use JSON also for folder metadata. Put it together into a big archive, compress it, and you're off. I hope the mime helps. And then not to do it in this spec, but in future specs, because it, might be short specs, but they all have different considerations. Explain how to ask servers to generate this archive, pretty please. And maybe some of those have considerations like, I can see some scenarios where you want pagination. I can see where you want resumable downloads and things like that. You might especially want resumable upload for restore cases. There's a bunch of things that are different for the different protocols, but this archive format can be independent of those protocols. So it's helpful to keep that as a separate spec. That's the case for the lines we've drawn, and we welcome comments and ideas and people who are excited about it and say, yes, let's go.
Thank you, Lisa. Any comments or questions?
Yeah, there's a draft. It's a very drafty draft, but there's a draft.
I'll put in last call. Bron.
I'm excited. Let's go.
Nice. Anyone else in the room or online as excited as Bron? DKG.
Hi, I also like this work. Would be happy to see it progress. I worry a little bit about the choice of the archive format and how well it copes with things like a shifting archive. And I know we don't want to get into that because down that road lies madness. There's like a lot of different things you can do. But if we're thinking about things like, I want to paginate, or it may be useful to at least have some of those ideas explicitly not described how to do it in the spec, but at least the archive should be designed in a way to do that. And I'm sorry that I have not read your draft, but if you can talk a little bit about how you might shape the archive format itself to support those cases, I would love to hear it.
Pete Resnick, who's also not read the draft, obviously. I see how this can be interesting in the IMAP JMAP case pretty straightforwardly. And part of that is because the structures are relatively straightforward to me. You want to make .eml files, you want to have some folder structure on top of them. Attributes maybe gets a little more complicated, but I can get that in my head. And there are currently tools that do, for instance, IMAP to IMAP transfers that may want to be able to use this as the intermediate format. Not sure. But for CalDAV, there's a lot of stuff there that I had talked to Braun some time ago because I was doing server-to-server migration of CalDAV, and we talked about whether that was even plausible, and they have some custom tooling for it, but not generalizable. And being able to do migration would be a wonderful thing. I'm not sure a flat archive is an interesting way to do it. I would love someone to take on that work, but I'm at least, that seems like a much bigger bite to take. And so maybe splitting the work would be useful.
Stripping out something that becomes too complicated is definitely a preferred approach of mine. I'm going to defer to Hans-Jörg.
Okay. Hans-Jörg, email and calendar migration enthusiast. Yeah, so obviously it's not a super simple thing to do in a way. I mean, there's even certain things you just cannot do based on APIs of existing systems. Just because some of the protocols we defined at the IETF are not imagining migration, but only live interoperability. So I'm thinking about stuff like I want to, have an appointment with participants. I can do that in live system things. If I want to replay that in a migration, many systems, or I think until we discussed about that in the past, in many systems you cannot suppress that kind of email notification for the event. In other systems, you cannot change organizers. Yeah? Obviously, and I think we state that in the current draft, this will not be something which solves all of the problems in the world. Yeah, that's for sure. Also because we can just not change existing systems. However, I also see opportunities like if systems can get this data in a different, in a new format and can, need to make an importer in a way, they might even, open up certain passes which they currently don't offer in their API. So I see there is a back and forth here, and I'm not sure if it makes really sense to split it off in that way, but we can maybe also discuss it.
Yeah, I think both of these are terrific questions and will require some offline, intense sharing of experience and workshopping possible answers. I love to think about the future direction and make sure we can do it, and then not necessarily do it now. I think we're all on the same page about this kind of careful simplification and careful scoping. Good. Thank you all. That's great.
One more comment from Braun.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, sorry, I put myself back up in the list because there's some chatter on the chat channel about the idea of having a incremental archive format as well. I think that's actually quite easy to do with this type of format because we have the JSON file that's an index of everything. We could easily have a incremental archive format, which includes the new EML files, the new calendar, any changed calendar files, and then a patch against the index, whether it's a JSON patch or something else if you put a UUID in every single one of these and you say it patches against this UUID, then you can easily tell that you're patching the correct file, so long as you don't reuse those things. Or you could do some kind of content-based ID if you wanted to be even more guaranteed that you're updating the previous version of this file. But I think it is quite easy to do that. That's how the Cyrus backup system works. It works out what's different and backs that up. Just appends it to an existing tar file, in fact. So there's ways to do that. And I think it would be worth considering that as part of this, is to have an incremental version of it as well that you could then merge together to create a new archive.
All right, thank you. Next up
Actually, question.
Yeah,
Did
go
we
ahead.
want to ask for this to be adopted here, or we just carry on? I know it might be early, we just posted one version, but
What would you prefer? Where would you like this to be handled?
Well, he's a co-author, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Come on, newbie.
I deserve that.
Get the grip. Sorry.
So are you asking the chairs to put this out for adoption? Or are you asking your co-authors in public?
See, it's not
Both.
just me.
I getting thumbs up, yes? So, okay. So I think we want to ask for adoption, yes.
Okay.
I can start to see.
Mr. Levine, you are up, sir.
So should I do this in the order that it's in the agenda or the order that's in the slides?
No, go through slides.
Okay. At large mail providers, it is common that when a user marks mail as junk, that it is possible for the provider to send the junk report back to the original sender if the original sender is someone they trust. And the way this works is that, I mean, I've set this up. I've written to various providers and say, here's my range of IP addresses. If people complain about mail from these IPs, tell me about it, which they occasionally do. And Yahoo prefers DKIM. I say these are the domains I use for DKIM signatures, and here's an address. So if people complain about a message with one of my DKIM signatures on it, then they send the report to that address, and this works okay. The problem is that it doesn't scale at all. You have to negotiate directly with every mail provider, or in fact these days there's a couple of companies that insert themselves in the middle and charge you money for managing these things. So rather than doing that, we can simply publish the contact information in the DNS. So that here, for example, for example.org, we would say that send the reports to this URL, and the URLs can either be something where you could do an HTTP post, or typically it'll just be a mail to. And there's some other hints you can put in, like this is the header we use to identify the customer. So please make sure you include that in the report, and stuff like that. So this is, the idea here is this would scale better if I want to know, where to send reports for spam reports for mail that you sign. Now I can just look it up. And just to clarify, this is not about DKIM validation failures. This is about people manually pushing the spam button. So the volume of reports will be related to the number of messages you send that annoy the recipients enough that they push the button. The mail providers still decide whether to send reports or not. No sensible provider is going to do it mechanically, because that would simply allow sleazy senders to do list washing. And I believe, do I have one more slide here? Nope. And Alex wrote up this draft. I believe Comcast has an experimental implementation of this. And I would have to ask, but I am pretty sure that the people who do these reports would be interested in this. And the one question that has come up is, since we have recharted the DKIM group, does this actually belong in the DKIM group? I believe the answer is no, because this is intended to work with the existing DKIM signatures, whereas the work in the DKIM group is for a new flavor of DKIM signature. So DKIM hasn't met yet. I will bring this up there, but unless I hear something surprising, I would encourage us to adopt this.
Yeah, I put this under topics of interest because I was fairly certain that this was in scope, because it's not really DKIM, it's just using information in the DKIM header. But I'll look at my co-chair and AG to confirm.
Yeah.
Murray's nodding affirmative.
Yeah, this is me. Yeah, I mean, this is simply automating discovery for the way that Yahoo sends reports now. So that's all I got for this draft.
Bron and Jim, are you in the queue for this? Jim is, Bron is not.
Hi, Jim Fenton. I would be really concerned about abuse of this, the data that's in this record. What is to prevent somebody from either, if it's a mail to address, from just spamming the heck out of that address, or from doing abuse to the HTTP to the web server here, or for example, if you were a competitor, a non-trustworthy competitor of some business, you might want to see an advertising campaign come out and immediately try and get everybody to believe that it's spam.
You can only you can only collect reports for stuff that you have signed. So the issue of the issue that you can send mail to people who haven't asked for it is a real one. On the other hand, we dealt with that with DMARC reports. So we could add something like that to say if it's not your own domain, then you need to put in another record to say, yeah, I will accept the reports. But other than that, this is something I want my reports. And then it's up to the mail system to decide whether they're going to either they'll send you reports or they won't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Harold.
If how do I call this, John? Imagination. If the sender that has signed the message is evil, can he use the feedback messages as training data to see what they should do in order to not alert the user that it's spam?
Of course, but that's no different from how it is now.
If you don't send him reports, he won't have the data.
But I'm saying, if I am a reasonably persuasive bad guy, I can get mail providers to send me reports now. It's currently up to the mail providers to decide who they're going to add to their manually maintained list of report recipients, and all this does is this say, well, this allows us to.
So when you say mail provider, who do you mean? The recipient's mail provider?
Yeah, the mail. Remember, this is triggered when a mail user pushes the junk button. So the operator of the system with the junk button, like Google or Yahoo or somebody like that, would then when they've got the junk report, then they will generally they will decide based on the reputation of the sender. If the reputation of the sender is pretty good, then they will send the report. If the reputation of the sender is poor, then they won't. And this is not intended to change that.
Okay, that's an important consideration.
Okay.
Okay, you want to move on, John?
Anything else, or should I go on to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead and move on.
Okay. This is Alex's other draft, which is, and again, this is for the benefit of senders who you think are pretty good but could do better. This is a way to give people a hint in your SMTP session about what you think about their mail, so that you can accept the message, you can reject the message. But now we have new enhanced status codes with a granularity of 10% of what we think of your mail. So here we're like, we took your mail, but it's 40% unwanted, so we'll probably put it in the junk folder. or this last one here is we rejected your mail because it smelled awful. So we add 10 new extended error message, extended status codes from .20 to .29 for 10% to 90%. That's what I have an off by one bug there, but I can fix it. It would actually be 21 to 29 for 10% to 90% chances unwanted. And once again, we only mean to avoid list washing, they would only send this to providers that they liked. And my guess is they will probably only do this once they had some sort of contract signed. But again, yeah, Comcast is experimenting with this. And yeah, the idea is basically to provide feedback to people who you trust enough that they think they will do something reasonable with the feedback. You know, and the status code, all it does is add status codes to the existing message. You know, it doesn't define anything new or interesting. Yes, yes. Pete will soon be in the queue.
Did you want to go first, Murray?
Okay, Murray. Yeah,
Yeah,
Murray.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yep, Murray's first.
So this is, you said about this and about a previous one, Comcast is messing around with it. Are there any consumers of this already? Like, it's one thing to put it in your status codes. It's another for someone to notice that it's there and do something with it.
I don't know. I'll have to ask him.
Ben.
Sorry.
Sorry to be stating the obvious, but I think most spam is already being written by AI or will soon be done, and that sounds like a perfect way to train it to write better spam.
Well, certainly, if you send it to malicious providers, I mean, I could easily imagine. I mean, I would say the majority of the spam that makes it in my inbox comes from Google and Microsoft. So if there was some way to, yeah, because it, you know, the stuff that comes from Gmail is a mix of real mail and of spam. And if I have better ways to tell Google, stop sending me this stuff, they might. You know, I mean, you're right. I mean, you don't want to send this to everybody. It's like it says here on this slide. We expect you only to report to senders who will use it responsibly. We realize that there's a lot of senders that do not fall into that category.
So if you don't want to make this public, why standardize it?
I have an answer to that question and then a follow-up with
Sure.
my own.
Pete, yeah.
Because the answer to why to make this public is multiple implementers might want to do this, even though you wouldn't want to deploy it to every single implementer that you, in other words, I might want to return this to Yahoo and Google and people that I think will actually listen to me and use it for good and might not want to send it to anybody else. That still makes interoperability important because we want everybody to agree to the same way. But
I can think of at least 4 providers that I would send this to.
Yeah, same here. Now, that said, are extended status codes things that you need a document in order to register them?
I don't remember.
Barry is looking the answer to that question up. And I guess my reaction to this is, this sounds like an experiment. And if the document was written up as an experiment, I don't see a big problem with this working group nodding and going, we'd like to see the answer to this experiment and publishing this document under our auspices and giving instructions like, don't be sending this to, you know, someone who advertises themselves as, you know, Uncle Joe's, you know,
spam and bait.
Spam and bait. Specification required. Okay, so you know, adding in the things that would make this an experiment as opposed to a proposed standard, which is just off you go and do this, and how people would judge the results or report the results, would make me a lot more comfortable about this group taking it on. And it's not fully baked enough yet to understand that people are gonna want to use it and are gonna make good use of it to call it standards track.
Yes, keeping in mind that it's not my draft.
Right.
I think experimental is fine.
And I believe there is currently a document out there about how to write a good experimental draft and what to put in it. And if you could point the author to that and say, throw in that section or two about how we should do this little experiment, I don't see any big problem with this group taking it on.
Okay, that's it. Sounds reasonable.
Anything else on this? All right. Thank you, John. That is the end of our formal agenda. Alexi, we've got some time left over if you wanted to present your stuff.
This is the thing coming out of email.
And now for very exciting IANA document. Sorry, that was sarcasm. Do you want me?
I can drive, but we've got this fancy clicker. You might as well use it.
Do
you want to give a little history of this?
No,
He does not want to give
considering the recent another private email exchange we're just having. I was like, I have to update my email core slides again. Email co-working group was chartered to work on updated email format and SMTP specs. And at the moment, two of these are in RFC editors queue. SMTP spec extended the registry for SMTP extensions by adding various columns to it. When I had a look at actually what is available on IANA website, what's already published on IANA website, as well as what SMTP spec is saying, I realized we have a couple of problems. One of them, that the data on IANA website is already out of date, so it needs fixing. And it ranges from updating RFC reference for some extensions to listing hello capabilities and other things. Actually, hold on. Yes, so for example, at the moment we have a separate registry for hello parameters, and it's already missing 3 extensions in it. The other thing that RFC 5321 bis does, it also says that certain fields should be should be filled by just putting RFC references. So somebody needs to go and look at RFCs to actually find out what the specific bit of information is. So what I've done in my copy spare time is I created a spreadsheet and just did all of this work for IANA. And this document is basically adding information missing, populating extra columns in SMTP extension registry. So I have 2 slides just to demonstrate the problem a little bit. You can, hopefully, if I click fast enough, you can see what's changing. So this is how the registry might look like after RFC 5321 bis is published. So columns in with green heading are the new one being added to the IANA registry. So stuff like hello parameters, additional verbs, length added, various other things. So Yes, so this is example. It has two existing extensions published in RFC and one speculative, private extension registered by somebody.
So true.
As you can see, various fields have just RFC references. Message submission use and values field actually also might have values which are not necessarily reflect whether the extension can be used for submission because of the rules in RFC 5321 bis. And after my draft is finished and done, this is how this will look like. So various fields filled in. Length edit field needs to be either extracted from RFCs or calculated, because in some cases it's not even defined by writers of extensions. So Murray very conveniently recharted the MAILMAINT working group to allow for this sort of documents, which doesn't require implementations. It's just the IANA maintenance.
Yep.
Who is being very excited about IANA stuff? I know it's almost Friday. I'm just I'm trying to entertain you as much as I can. I know it's such an interesting document, but
I haven't been watching the emails that have been going back and forth while we've been here. But is this still an open question as to whether this would come here or email core? As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter, because I think there's the expertise in both groups to do this, and it's basically just backfilling, as you said, a spreadsheet.
Yeah,
it's not a heavy lift.
It's a good question. Realistically, probably 90% people are the same in both groups, so it doesn't matter. I'm happy not like.
It also depends on how quickly the chair of email core wants to close that group.
Out of my control, I've given up.
No, it's not.
It will exist forever.
Yeah.
So, yes, so very good point. My first question is, I think we need to figure out whether email core charter actually allows it. It might or might not. I haven't investigated the question. I suspect it might not allow. If it doesn't, then I will obviously ask the question here. Happy not to ask it here, but kind of pre-warn people that this is coming up. Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, the only thing I haven't done is the length edit field, because it actually required more work than just looking up values.
I'd be willing to help with that.
Yeah. Can I provisionally ask for some volunteers to help validate data on this? That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see what shakes out in email core, and then if it's going to come here, we'll take it to the list.
Thank you.
So that is it for presentations. Mary, did you have something to say?
I'm not going to take time here. Go ahead.
Any other business before we do a quick recap? So as far as I recall, we have, John's going to add some security considerations to wrong recipient, posted a list, and we'll see if that requires us to do another last call. Lexi is going to implement UID batches over the weekend. And then we're going to take UID batches to working group last call, assuming that Alexi's work does not require any changes to the spec. Expires header, John is going to attempt to roll in as expire because. OAuth profile is chugging along. I don't think there's any action items on that right now. We just need people to look at it and some implementations. Auto config, the existing legacy format, we're going to take that to working group last call, and we're going to continue to churn on the new format. And for web push and data portability, we're going to take the list and see if there's enough interest to bring those work items into the working group. As far as the SMT status codes and email feedback, I think we're going to talk to Comcast, see what their plan is in terms of their experimentation. If they plan to continue with that, then we'll have them make the drafts experimental with the proper language and see what shakes out of it.
John just said he thought that the spamminess one was experimental, and the
I'm not sure which one he's.
Spamminess is the status code.
Status codes, okay.
Was the one that I suggested experimental. The other one is the report, the feedback loop. For the feedback loop, we'd have to hear about multiple implementations before we take it on.
Right.
Experimental, we wouldn't. But
I suggest asking Comcast that question about both of them.
Right, because if they've already got other people lined up for multiple implementations of status codes too, then we can do it as proposed standard, and they can play amongst themselves.
I've not been part of the conversation, but my impression is that this has been bantered around in MOG, and Comcast started to do something with it. We'll see if anyone else has. Anything that I said in my little rundown sound incorrect to anybody? All right. Thank you very much. Go grab an early lunch, and we'll see you back here in 90 minutes for JMAP.
I won't be at JMAP. I have to go to a different thing, but I'll catch up with you after that.
I'm not chair anyways of that. That's wrong.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Your work is done here.
Well, for now. Wait a minute, is that it? Drip's not meeting. D. Kim and I edit this, but I think they're both tomorrow.
D. Kim's in the morning.